So for the gospel reading this morning, I've chosen a little piece of Matthew chapter 5 on the Beatitudes. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. These are words inspired by God. So, a brief word of introduction to people who are coming here this morning for the first time. So every month I take a theme for the month, and then on the first and second Sundays I develop the theme, and then on the third Sunday I do a recap and a Q&A. And so for the month of May, I've taken as my theme, I call it kind of a brief manual for incarnation and reincarnation. What are some of the kind of the guidelines or the rules of the road once you sign up and you volunteer for incarnation? So I began last Sunday and I looked at 8 of these kinds of rules or guidelines. And the first one I talked about was that we are eternal beings. We were never born and we will never die. We simply inhabit these spacesuits for a period of time, but that is not our beginning or our end. We're eternal beings. We're bite-sized pieces of God who volunteered for human incarnation. The second thing I spoke of then was that we actually do volunteer for incarnation. We're not here because we took a wrong turn at Alpha Centauri. We're here because we volunteer to be here. Number 3, I talked about how we choose the timing for our various incarnations, what factors in to the timing of it. Number 4, I talked about the fact that every single one of us is here on planet Earth right now. We're at the right place at the right time because we signed up and we said to God, send me, I'm ready. Number 5, I looked at the question of how often do we reincarnate? Number 6, last week I talked about the notion of what I call soul pods and shadow pods. Number 7, I looked at what are our objectives when we volunteer for incarnation? And then number 8 last week, I talked about the big difference between the ego and the soul. So I want to continue kind of writing this manual this week, and I'm going to deal with it about the 7 more topics. So the first one I'll talk about today is the realization that violence does not work. So that will be rule number 9. Number 10, that darkness and evil are the result of many factors, and I'll talk about some of those factors today. Number 11, I want to talk about the ways in which we've managed to corrupt human institutions of all kinds. Number 12, I want to talk about crisis as opportunity. Number 13, I want to talk about the notion of uniformitarianism, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Number 14, I want to talk about the levels of motherhood. And then 15, I want to finish with what I call the Light Workers Manifesto number 2. Last year, I wrote Light Workers Manifesto. Today, I want to write a second volume to it. So that's what I get into this morning, God willing. So first, violence does not work. And violence could be in our thoughts, in our words, or in our deeds. And it never works. It never serves the evolutionary trajectory of this species. And all of the great teachers have taught us this. The Buddha taught us this. And Jesus taught us that. Gandhi taught us that. Martin Luther King Jr. taught us that. Now, we've tried violence as a solution to human situations for many millennia, and it hasn't worked. And it's not going to work into the future. Since about 800 BCE, all of the great teachers have shown us the insanity of thinking that we can solve human problems by taking human lives. The realization is that only love and compassion and forgiveness will shift the paradigm. And what I've seen very, very often in world history is that when corrupt systems are overthrown violently and replaced by alleged liberators, the liberators turn out to be even more violent and more corrupt than the system they overthrow. So if you learn to achieve your objectives through violence, you have to become a violent person. And when you get into a position of authority and power, you'll continue to exercise that same level of violence. So violence never works. So that would be rule number 9 for me. Number 10, I believe that darkness and evil are the result of many, many factors. And those of you who have been members of COJ for many years, I gave an entire retreat on this topic a few years ago. So evil is a multifactorial equation. It is the most thorny kind of problem in all of theology. It's called theodicy. Why do bad things happen to good people? What is the origin of darkness and evil? And it is multifactorial. And so, firstly, our individual misuse of free will keeps us stuck at the service to self end of the spectrum. Every single one of us is born as a narcissist, and rightly so. If the neonate were not a narcissist, it wouldn't survive. It needs, shelter, it needs clothes, it needs loving, it needs mama's breast and milk. It has all these needs. But as we move and evolve over the course of our lives, we're meant to go from service to self to service to other people. And so when we continue to use our free will to indulge our service to self, that's one origin of darkness and evil. Then there's a kind of what I would call an aggregated species-wide misuse of free will. That when we as a human family project all our own shadow material onto nature, then we create problems at a global level. It's like there's what's called the Pacific garbage patch. There's an area in the Pacific Ocean between the east coast of Asia and the west coast of North America, which is just filled with garbage. It's bigger than the state of Texas. And it's the discarded, garbage, of Asia and America. Now, we do the same thing ourselves, and we project all our own shadow material as a human family onto nature and use it as a resource. That's a second reason for the darkness and the evil. There's a third level, I believe, which is I would call them discombobulated souls who are stuck in Earth orbit. That there are souls who've transitioned, and either through addiction to something belonging to planet Earth or to fear of various kinds, they're stuck in some kind of an astral realm. They're stuck in a place of shadows, and they continue to try to indulge their addictions by kind of taking over the psyches of living human beings. So that would be a third kind of reason for the evil or the darkness. And then I believe that there are technologically and intellectually advanced extraterrestrial civilizations or even extra-dimensional civilizations who are using human beings literally for their own gratification. It's like what you look at bullfighting and you look at a human being torturing an animal to the delight of an audience. Now, people who set two dogs fighting at each other and they're getting off psychologically on the distress that the animals are experiencing. So there's some, advanced technologies, who themselves have no emotions left. They've technologically transitioned into some kind of transhumanism. So they have no emotions, including compassion or a sense of humor. And so they're using kinds of proxies in order to try to reawaken their own emotional. There was a brilliant Russian astrophysicist called Nikolai Kardashev, who many years ago created what he called a system of different levels of people, different kind of technologically advanced beings. He called that typology. So a type 1 being, according to him, would be a denizen of a planet where these people have learned to kind of utilize all of the natural resources of their planet, but to do it ecologically, whether it's earthquakes or tides or volcanoes or sunshine or wind or whatever, that they've harnessed the energies of the planet, but done it ecologically. That would be a type 1 civilization. A type 2, he said, would be a civilization that has managed to do that for its entire, a solar system. In our case, it would be that we could utilize the resources of Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto and the sun itself to meet our needs. He said a type 3 would be a group that can do that at a galactic level. Now, if you can imagine an advanced society like this, who are technologically and intellectually really, really advanced, but they're stuck at the service to self end of the spectrum, then they're capable of doing extraordinary damage to us and to planet Earth. So these, for me, are some of the factors when I think about the problem of evil or of darkness. Rule number 10 for incarnation is the ability to recognize corrupted human institutions, to recognize when the darkness has hijacked and corrupted human institutions. And it's happened in every institution. Anything which has survived long enough at some stage is going to have to contend with the temptation to internal corruption. We find that through this darkness, this corruption within the agribusiness, within education, within finance, within the justice system, in the mass media, in materialistic science, in medicine, in the military-industrial complex, in politics, and in religion. All of these institutions at some stage are corrupted, by selfish people within the system. So it's important to realize that this is our job to bring light into these institutions. And I will finish this morning actually by creating what I call the Light Workers Manifesto version 2. Rule number 12 for me of Incarnation or Reincarnation is crisis as opportunity. Crises are opportunities to develop creativity, to develop courage, and to develop compassion. And this is true at a personal level, it's true at an emotional level, it is true at a scientific level, it is true at a technological level, and it's true at a sociological level. At every single level, the crises we experience are meant to develop our creativity, to develop our courage, and to develop our compassion. So how could there be problem-solving creativity in the absence of problems? Without crisis, we would simply be bland, soulless robots who have been pre-programmed to be nice, law-abiding dullards. And so in some senses, the intersection of light and darkness is the womb of evolution. In mathematics, when we talk about set theory, particularly in geometry, if you get two circles that overlap, the intersection piece is called the vesica, and it is shaped, in my opinion, like a vulva, like the entrance to a womb, because it is the womb of evolution. It is the kind of the meeting of the light and the dark that creates all movement forward, that creates all evolution. So it becomes very important for us that we avail of these opportunities, the darknesses that we encounter in all of the institutions, and that it be the spur for us to shine light into it and to further the evolution of the human species. Rule number 13 for me is uniformitarianism. It's a big word. Uniformitarianism is the unfounded assumption that the laws of nature, for instance, gravity or the speed of light, have always been the same since the Big Bang. They've given the name to that. They call it uniformitarianism, that the rules of nature have never changed since the Big Bang itself. Now, that's not true. There's actual scientific evidence, for instance, that both gravity and the speed of light have changed and are continuing to change. Now, the question for me then is, if the cosmos itself continues to change and to evolve, why would the laws governing these changes not also evolve? And why would our understanding and our relationships with ourselves, with each other, and with God not also continue to evolve? So we must constantly be on the cutting edge of this evolution and not get stuck in the belief system, things are the way they've always been and will continue to be that way forever and ever, amen. Rule number 14 for me is, I call it the levels of motherhood. I believe that we have a trinity of mothers. There is the human mother who bore you in her womb, and this was by a soul contract. You agreed to be a child to her, and she agreed to be a mother to you. So that's the first level of motherhood. The human woman who bore you in her womb, gave birth to you, and suckled you at her breast. The second mother is Gaia, or Pachamama, and that is the planet who supplied you with all of your needs: air, water, food, clothing, shelter, and finally will supply you with the tomb, which is the second womb, to receive and to recycle your now unneeded spacesuit. That's the second level of motherhood. And the third level of motherhood is Mother God herself. She goes by many names. In Christianity, she's called Mary. Other sisters will call her Isis or Tara. In Hebrew, Shekhinah, Kuan Yin. And so Mother God is the one who conceived of you long before you were actually physically conceived. So I want to remember all three on this day, May the 12th, 2024, on Mother's Day. I want to bless and remember and thank all those three mothers. And finally, I want to end up with, I call it the Light Workers Manifesto #2. Last year, I wrote the first version of this. And this week, I've written a kind of an add-on, a second version of it. So I call it the Light Workers Manifesto #2. Because as a human species, we need a transformation of both our consciousness and our mission. And so as we move from being Homo sapiens sapiens into being Homo spiritualis, we must shift in the following fashion. We must shift education from indoctrination to exploration. We must shift entertainment from sensual arousal to mystical stimulation. We have to shift economics from dominion by the elite to distribution to all. We have to shift religion from dogmatic sectarianism to unity identity. We have to shift politics from party-affiliated blindness to issue-identified solutions. We have to shift agriculture from Gaia-destructive profiteering to Gaia-enhancing gratitude. And we must shift medicine from pharmaceutically controlled disease management to people-centered, hands-on healthcare. And finally, I want to say this. How often do you think now comes? There's a famous statement by a contemporary of Jesus, a guy called Hillel the Elder. And at one stage, he very famously said, "If I am not for myself, who am I? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" And the Hopi prophecy of many, many moons ago said, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Are you ready? Namaste, my brothers and sisters.